My name is Grace Peng, and welcome to the Interagency Modeling and Analysis Group pre-meeting webinar series for the conference on integrating machine learning with multiscale modeling. And today we have a speaker from our DARPA project, ASCII. Eric from Galois will be talking about automated scientific knowledge extraction with AMIDOL. So I'll pass it over to you, Eric.
Thank you very much, Grace. So AMIDOL is an attempt to solve part of the automated scientific knowledge extraction problem that DARPA has posed. And the idea here is we want to do two things. We want to help take scientific knowledge that exists in artifacts and lift it into a usable form so that we're not just ending with code that goes onto the shelf to get dusty and die and never be reused, but also to help with the development of models for domain scientists and experts. So the ideal we're working towards is when modeling for crisis response or any situation where we need to generate models for quick decisions, we'd like domain experts to be able to use tools that make them capable of agile, performable, and high confidence modeling in response to crisis, and to leverage these models to make decisions on actions, policies, or just continuous improvement and feedback to improve outcomes. The reality, though, is different. Building complex systems of models requires these large teams of mathematicians, software engineers, and modelers, or we just kind of assume that the people doing the modeling will not only be an expert in epidemiology or whatever their domain field is, but also experts at mathematics, software engineering, data science. And the result of this is that we end up with models that aren't quite so agile. They're not reusable. We don't see people using the models for other domains. They don't generalize well. They're not maintainable. Oftentimes, models have to be redeveloped. They're not easily developed in the first place. They take a lot of time and expertise. And because they're either not developed by expert software engineers or they're developed kind of over these long periods and complex teams, they end up not being as performable as they could be. So AMIDOL is an attempt to address a lot of these problems. Our high-level goals are improving the ability of domain experts to build and maintain models, and to improve the explainability and agility of the results of machine inference. And we're doing this from a couple ways. One of our big motivators is lowering the barrier to entry associated with formal languages. We really don't want scientists to have to worry about writing code in Fortran or Python or Julia or whatever their language of choice is. We'd like them to interface with languages that are much closer to their domain and which they're much more comfortable with. We want to allow them to still express, though, rich mathematical concepts, and we believe one really good way to do this is visual diagrams that have meaning. We back these diagrams with meanings, decouple the process of model optimization, performance, and implementation by doing this automatically with program synthesis, and utilize performable tested backend solution methods. So we're building engines that generate code through a universal intermediate representation so that we can easily translate the ideas of a scientist into something that ends up being an executable model. So we draw a lot of our inspiration from semi-formal diagrams that we see in a lot of papers and literature. If you go out and you read your average biological paper, they have these great pictures that demonstrate the structure and a bit about kind of the process semantics of a domain being studied, whether we're talking about cell splitting or say analyzing the DNA of a number of different samples, or even something like epidemiology with a compartmental model. And we want to try to leverage these diagrams, which a human brain can interpret and understand, into something a machine can interpret. So our idea behind this is generating these visual languages that look a bit like flow diagrams, or perhaps they look more like just stoichiometric equations that actually are backed with real meaning. So the way we do this is we get the scientists to talk to us a bit about their domain language that they use. So this is an example of a Tat Transactivation Model we've used. And we translate this into something that the machine can actually back with real mathematics. And our hope is that what we can do is find connections between these diagrams and the actual underlying mathematics, and use this so that we can reuse these models and write these mathematics in ways that are easier to understand and reason about. In this example of a Tat Transactivation Model, we're actually highlighting here a piece of the model and the visual syntax and how it relates to the underlying differential equations, but we can use this to answer complex questions. For instance, here are two different differential equation models of that same system, and we might say, are they the same? They actually happen to be the same with respect to the predictions of Tat, but it's not clear from these diagrams. They have to be executed. And AMIDOL allows us to take these models and directly translate them into executable code. The way we do this is a stack that starts with these visual formalisms, and they don't just have to be epidemiology related or cellular biology related. They could also be about disaster relief, chemistry, physics, any process you can think of. And we automatically translate this into what we call an intermediate representation. This is something the machine understands that represents the abstract math. And it's usually where a data scientist or a mathematical modeler would address the problem. We declare a set of measures on this, turn them into an executable model automatically, and then solve it via regression, classification, ODE solution, differential equations, discrete event solution, whatever happens to be the method that is most appropriate for your problem. We store the results in a results database. We do all the optimization and equivalence testing in the back end. And what we try to do is then shorten this whole process and make it easier to develop, maintain, and also to exchange the models. So how does this work in practice? Well, you start out by drawing something like your model. In this case, this is an SIR infection model, susceptible, infected, and recovered, that demonstrates an infection and recovery from a viral infection. We translate this to our intermediate representation, which for folks who are more familiar, we're using a process algebra, specifically stochastic activity networks. And then those get translated into the solution method, in this case, differential equations. We solve these differential equations, and then we allow ourselves to ask questions about those results. This includes prediction of the system, how will it evolve, risks involved in the system, forecasting, model comparison, risk assessment. There's a rich variety of measures. Basically, any measure you could construct mathematically, you can attach to these models easily. And then the AMIDOL stack handles all this in the background, producing code that can still be used by someone with the proper skills, either in Python or Julia or C or Scala, whatever the language is of your choice. But we hide that detail from people who are not interested in interfacing with the model at that level. In process, we actually have a tool available today. You can find it on our GitHub, which I think was on the first slide. It allows you to draw these tools, to construct your own languages, to assign rewards to these, and your models can be both simple or more complex. You can automatically generate the code from this interface and execute the models, and it's something we're trying to build towards extreme usability. We also allow you to extract models and languages of visual formalisms from code you've already written. So the idea here is we try to capture artifacts in the code and papers, especially as annotated by our colleagues at the University of Arizona through their Automates project, and transform that into executables and visualization. How does this work? Well, starting with the papers and with the kind of extant code, we extract a number of our intermediate representations or our process algebras. We label those with the help of our colleagues so that we know how they relate to domain concepts. And then we relate these domain concepts to an ontology. In this case, we're using SNOMED to attach these to medical concepts. And then we're able to replace these with simple visual formalisms that can be included in your process model. In practice, what happens is we use these groundings Arizona gives us to search through the ontology through nodes that are annotated by someone who knows something about the system. So here we've come through and decorated an ontology element with information that it's a virus and how to interpret it as an executable part of our system. We get the exact executable model and the mathematics from the code. And then what we do is we're able to extend and add to visual formalisms based on what we find to give you a richer palette with which to draw your models in the future. This can be repeated and the palette can be extended any number of times so that we're able to take knowledge you found in the wild from other studies and reuse it and generalize those results so that you can continue to build models for your own work. We also have a design of experiments package we're working on for this, where we say it's not enough just to build the model and execute it. We also want to do things like compare the model. So compare models to other models or models to data so that we can do types of algebras on measures for complex comparisons. Say, did I get a good fit for my data? Does this model better predict my results than another model? And the way we support this, along with hypothesis testing and a number of other different measures, is by creating this results database that we can ask questions about with experiments. So here are different M nodes tell us we have different models. The N's are measurements, and the R's are results from those models. And D represents data from the real world. So comparison and hypothesis testing in this case reduces to a simpler problem, which is asking, how does it compare to previous results? How does it compare what I learned before? And it gives us a knowledge base that we can then leverage moving forward. So where does this leave us? At the end, what we're trying to do here is to build an entire modeling stack. And this is ongoing research that we're very interested in collaborating with folks who have problems that we might explore, especially when it comes to model development. But we're trying to build a system that helps us do two things. The first is to, as scientists move forward, to annotate the abstract or domain knowledge that they have in something that can be automatically used for code generation or for understanding models moving forward. But also so that we can leverage existing artifacts in both the abstract knowledge layer, which would be papers that have been written, or executable knowledge, so code that has already been written, to try to turn this into a more generalizable form that can be used going forward. We're trying to prevent the situation that's happened a lot in the past where someone does a study, hires a group to help them develop a model, and 2 or 3 years later, when they get a follow-on funding for that study, they find that they can't use that code, either because there were IP constraints, or perhaps the code just isn't performable, or they find out that it doesn't run anymore. We're now liberating this into something that will always generate code for the newest targets, that we're planning on keeping updated, and is available today through our GitHub under an open source license. So we'd like to encourage people to use this, to give us some feedback as we develop this, but we want to create an environment where people can develop models without these kinds of encumbrances and free up the time of domain scientists to actually do domain science and not worry so much about the software engineering concerns. The other great thing that we have here is we don't lock you into one solution method. So while you might solve a problem once with differential equations and you find someone is using an agent-based model and you say, you know, I wish I could re-implement my model, because our implementations are general enough, we can automatically transform from one solution technique to another. This also means that if later you modify your model and find that it can't be solved by your previous method, for instance, you were using differential equations, but now you really want not just an estimate of the value, but an estimate of the distribution of possible values, we can move to a different and more appropriate solution technique with no redevelopment of the model necessary. All of this, we hope, helps move forward science and make these processes more automatic to get scientists writing less code, spending less time as computer scientists, and more time as virologists or medical researchers or chemists or whatever their domain happens to be, so that they spend more time on that important domain science, discovering these important kind of facts about their area, which normally they would spend all this time on other development concerns. So that's kind of the summary of where we are with AMIDOL. And if you have any questions, feel free to follow up through the page. And yeah, it's a project we're pretty excited about. So thank you very much.